Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Juan Pablo, and hello again, everyone. It's really good to be with you all. It's the fourth day in the series of sessions that we have been organizing as part of GIFT's 10-year anniversary. And I hope you've had a chance to join us in at least one, if not multiple sessions over the past few days. Today's session is slightly different from the previous ones. This one is meant to be the main assembly of the GIFT General Stewards, which you all are. And our hope is that we can seek your guidance and suggestions on a couple of important areas of work that GIFT is advancing. One which is on tax transparency, which GIFT has been working on for a couple of years. And there's been some important updates to give you on that, and I'll come to that in a minute. And a second is on bringing in subnational governments into GIFT's, sort of embracing subnational governments even more closely within GIFT's work than previously. In part due to the requests and demand from subnational local governments to join the network. So we will have a chance to go through both those topics with you in more detail. That's the main issues that will be discussed in today's session. But we want to begin by just giving the floor to a couple of speakers who can help us set the tone for this today's session, for this meeting. We were hoping to have, and I'm sorry if I don't as yet know whether our speakers are ready. I know that one of the speakers, the Honorable Jose Alejandro Herrera from Bogota City, he is with us. I see him. Welcome to the session. We are also expecting the Vice Minister of Finance from Liberia. Juan Pablo, perhaps you can tell me if she is available as yet. If not, we'll start with Mr. Herrera.
Thank you, Vivek. Buenos días. Hello. Bonjour tout le monde. And thank you, Vivek. It is a really special honor for us to have you representing the lead stewards in this facilitating this session. Thank you very much. I don't know if we have our Liberia representative. They kindly asked me to give them time to address the session. But while they express themselves or join us, let's give the floor to our colleague from the city of Bogota, if you please, Vivek. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is yours, Mr. Herrera.
Muchas gracias. Voy a compartir pantalla.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to speak about the role of the city of Bogota. Please wait a second. Okay, so right now, are we looking at the presentation now? Yes, that's correct. Okay, this is a very brief subject, and it is how we have built this information for the citizenship that was viewed in our website. It is a website with all of the information with the budget of Bogota and the different components of the city's finances. We have the investors' information. This is related with the debt and with the bonuses, emissions that we have done. And we have the execution budgeting. It is a very long list. And we have consistently published the information of income and expenses. We also have the Bogota's treasury. We have the accounting information, all of the financial statements that we have in the website, and the fiscal framework that we have every year. and it is presented to the City's Council for the budget decision-making. And then we also have all of the part of the charging information, and we also have a tab with all of the publications that we wanted to highlight. We have a series of information which is long enough and that is reviewed by the different stakeholders that required information within the city, and especially by the investors who want to do a forecast of the bonus emission. It is very important for them to understand the city fiscal capacity. And we have entered during the last 2 or 3 years in the stock market, and we have an important volume in the internal stock market. We have been renowned as a recurring market emitter, and our emissions have been high during the last month. So that means that we have our doors open to the stock market in a very adequate way. We have this balance between the debt and the income, and we have been qualified at that same level. And we have been said that if it wasn't because of the maximum limit of the nation, we would have the maximum amount. So this is what we have presented for the citizenship. How can we achieve it? We have achieved it with these transparency tools. So we have the participation of the Ministry of Finance, and we have this information which is consolidated. This information is being implemented. We are doing a transition between that system that was built in-house, and now we have a broader system, because we had some concerns regarding the information. And now we have in a bulk data system that allows us to have the better management about these matters. We have taxes on the property and on the economic activity, and that represents a very big challenge to present it. So we have some attention points that were overcrowded, and it's thanks to this bulk data that we can provide this information. People can have a self-service because we have this virtual office, and in that sense, they can just visit this website just as if they were, visiting their banks. And if they were asking to this information, they can just have access to this information. They can just do their payments online. And nobody will present a physical declaration. They can just do it throughout this website. This will generate security regarding the information, because we had some difficulties to present the information, and this will guarantee the information's confidentiality. We have also optimized the scheme for the complaints and claims and suggestions. So it is all about improving the efficiency to present this information. And this is related with the way in which we have the information in the different territories. If we don't have the complete information of the territories, we have some tools like the SEC plan, which belongs to the Ministry of planning, and we have different projects with the different components regarding the investment projects in the cities of Bogota, and we have 20 localities. Undersecretary, you have 1 additional minute. And we also have some information systems that allow us to present all of the city's information that comes from all of the entities. We have different information layers, and we also have this system which is called CISBEN that is related to the help allocation plans. And what we're doing is to have the expenses quality. We have the goals and results and products that is presented to the citizenship. We present what are the different resources. We are also tracking the budget. We consider it to be fundamental within the city. We're going to do some expenses evaluations. And all of that information that is within the website will be within a fiscal observatory so that it can be used as information analysis and content production.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Herrera.
much.
That was great. And it's so good to hear about the innovations from Bogota, because our open contracting partnership colleagues have also told us about some of the innovations in the city around open contracts. And it's good to see that it's not just in any one area, but the city is innovating in multiple areas. There's a lot that we all can learn from that experience. Your presentation, your opening remarks in many ways is a good segue into the session that we, or the topic in this session that we want to have a deeper dive on. We would want to discuss with you plans to expand GIFT's membership and bring in more subnational entities to join GIFT's network. And so I'm going to invite Juan Pablo to provide us with some introductory comments that helps us understand better what are the implications, what's the plan for bringing in more subnational entities into GIFTs, and what are the implications of it. Juan Pablo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vivek. The GIFT network is a very open network. In order to become members, you basically need to express your willingness to engage on behalf of your agency, of your institution, in advancing our causes, fiscal transparency, accountability, and participation. So throughout the years, we've had a very good and collaborative relationship with champions at national or federal level, but also at local level. One example, of course, has been recently Bogota, but before that, we had a very good collaboration with cities such as Mexico City, the government of Guanajuato, the government of Querétaro in Mexico, in Germany, one city that is shared with us the experience of citizen participatory budgeting, Cascais in Portugal, not only sharing their experience, but hosting us a couple of years ago. So that experience has been there. When a couple of subnational entities came to us to express their interest to become members, we figured that, as said at the beginning, an open network was open to anyone. So we actually don't need to change our rules in order to have as members subnational governments. That is why this is an informative session to the General Stewards Assembly, because there is no rules change in our operating procedures. As you know, the function of admitting new members lies on the lead stewards. Vivek representing them now. We have other lead stewards represented here, the Ministry of Finance of Mexico, the Ministry of Finance of the Philippines is with us, International Federation of Accountants, and our Brazilian government colleagues are here too. So with them, we discuss the possibility of opening to subnational governments. We get them arguments that I believe are very valid for this to move ahead. One, they are champions too. They push this agenda and they have very innovative practices, particularly in what regards the closeness to their communities and their citizens. And the presentation from Bogota from Sub-Secretary Alejandro Herrera Lozano just gave us very good examples. The second advantage is the closeness of the government, the authorities with the citizens, and the collaboration practices for addressing public services and for openness. And also in many cities or local governments, as you know, there are path-breaking initiatives very much linked to global issues that we care about, such as the SDGs or climate change and corruption issues. With all of those, we presented the plan to the lead stewards, and in few words, they said, let's go ahead. Let's start with Bogota, but let's try for a couple of years and see what impact do we have with local governments joining the network, and what is the impact? How much do we learn, us, the network, 54 members today, from this experience? So we're going to have a 6-month period to admit subnational governments. We hope that we will have a diversity of regions, not only
sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Do you want me to show you a PowerPoint at this point? No.
Not anymore. We have
Okay.
a PowerPoint that we showed a couple of days ago in the session. Thank you, Aura. But at this point, we can just continue like this, and the PowerPoint will be to your consideration. So that's the first condition is 6 months. We would love to have all regions represented. It would help if some of you from Indonesia, from South Africa, Nigeria, Croatia, present candidates, but doesn't have to be the rule. It can be a subnational member of a government that is not already part of us. We're very open there. And after these 6 months, we will test that experience for 2 years. At the end, we will make an assessment. We will report back to you and to the lead stewards, and they will take a decision about continuing this experience. The assessments will include to what extent there was progress in the fiscal transparency and public participation indicators, but also how much they learned and we learned as a whole from them. That is the general setting of the admission of subnational governments. I will leave it there for your questions. In the session that we devoted specifically to this, and where we had the presentations from Bogota and the government of Guanajuato in Mexico, there were very important questions. One of them is about how stable are local governments in order to make sure that we first have one who is very open, but then we might have another one who is not that open. And there we would, my response is that we would apply the rules as we have them now in our operating procedures. That is that we can always invite a member to leave the network if we see that they're not only not advancing the agenda, but they're going against it. And of course, in order to maintain your status as member, you need to be active, you need to be present, you need to organize events that benefit the rest of the members and of course our agenda, and you need to have a plan and a report on progress that will be applied as well to them. Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. So we have time now to just hear from the general stewards. If you all have any comments on this path that GIFT wishes to take, any suggestions, any questions, please raise them.
Thank you to the Assembly. May I ask if there is any objection to this plan to proceed? Thank you.
Hi, Vivek. This is Rolly. Yeah, just a clarification, not a question, but it's a clarification. What is the timeline here? Or 6 months, when will this start? And how are we going to move forward if ever we have to evaluate the Bogota city? What are our parameters in that?
Thank you. Rolly Toledo, Subsecretary of the Department of Budget and Management in the Philippines, Elite Stewards representative. That is where the presentation would have been useful, you're right. So if this assembly is okay with the plan, we would go from August until February next year. Those are the 6 months for admitting new members. And there you have it. Thank you, Aura. And the 2 years evaluation would take place in the summer of 2023. And for that, we would be using, if you move ahead a couple of slides, Aura, there you go. So May, June 2023, the assessment, and the main criteria is the next slide. Of course, they will have to fulfill the functions of a steward, and we will be looking at particularly, next slide, thank you. That one. So the improvements in fiscal transparency and public participation, how sustainable is continuing admitting the subnational governments, the topic that I mentioned of innovation, and very importantly, how much we learn from them and how much they can share on the question of inclusiveness, reaching out to particularly minorities and vulnerable social groups. Now, if the assessment takes us to, thank you, Aura, to the conclusion that we should again devote the GIFT network to national setting members, then subnational governments can still work with us, collaborate with us, as they have been doing it in the past, and that is as partners, not full members. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Jose Menendez.
Buenos días a todos. Solo tengo una, José Menéndez del Ministerio de Finanzas de Guatemala.
Good morning to you all. I'm Jose Menendez from the Ministry of Finances in Guatemala. I have just one concern. What is the logic of just accepting 4 applications in the pilot program? Thank you.
Thank you, José Antonio. Y sigo en español, ya que
I will continue in Spanish since many of you
la versión en inglés.
are listening to the translation. So the logics in this is that we are 54 members. we are a small network. So admitting 4 members means that we are growing almost by a 10%. So we would be scared. I'm sorry if this seems pretentious to be so popular, but for example, today, besides of Bogota and Medellin and Cartagena, well, we would love it, but we would also like to have cities from other regions. So that's my first comment. And if we were so attractive and so popular, this could surpass our attention capacities. We want the new members to be benefited at the maximum level by this collaboration and by this partnership and by the system that we have. Thank you.
Zuki, please go ahead.
Thanks, Vivek. Mine is very quick, just to say, yeah, I think it's an exciting idea, and I think a really exciting point that the network is at. Perhaps just the one thing that is a bit of a regret is that at the, in 2020, we weren't aware that this would be a direction that GIFT would take, and we supported a local government in South Africa with applying to be the first OGP local entity within the OGP network. So that was the first in South Africa. But had we known, this would certainly have been, I think, our starting point in terms of providing some of the network guidance. But I did wonder, hearing you, Juan Pablo, I completely understand the need to be quite careful without overextending, the capacity of the network. But I wondered if there is an interim to say, particularly where the aspect of providing support to a local entity around their learnings in relation to fiscal transparency, is there a space to still sort of, a middle ground to say perhaps some resource support or just learning support that isn't formalized in the context of a pilot, but recognizes, for example, an entity that might one day formally come back and apply and ask to be part of the network?
Absolutely, Suki, thank you. And as you know, the way most of our members have become one is by first starting a collaboration, coming to our meetings, sharing their experience, getting to know you, and sometimes becoming, after that acquaintance, becoming close friends. And then they go back and they have their own team back, and they come to the network and they make their application to become members. So that process is absolutely still going to be open. In other words, we might end up in the next 2 years with 4, 5 new full members, but maybe as many as another 4 or 5 working with us as partners. I wouldn't be surprised. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We do need to move on to the next topic, but if there are more questions, please just put them in the chat function, using the chat function, and we will try and answer you. But it is clear to me that even more so than the lead stewards meeting, at the general stewards meeting, there's a sense of enthusiasm, and there is also a real desire to almost an impatience to have even more governments get the opportunity to be part of an initiative like this. So that gives Juan Pablo and the GIFT team a lot to think about as to whether there is more demands than what is being considered right now, and whether more subnational entities can also be accommodated in different ways. But with that, let's move on to the next topic. But I want to start again by giving the floor to a very dear colleague of ours from Liberia, the Vice Minister of Finance, Honorable Tane Brunson, who's a very passionate advocate for fiscal openness. Many of us met her just before the pandemic broke out. It was our last overseas visit to South Africa, where we had launched the GIFT's pilot initiative to promote public participation in budgeting, and Honorable Brunson was there, and she she's going to now address us with some remarks. Honorable Brunson, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Vivek. Thank you to all of you on the platform. I'm pleased to be here. Our Minister of Finance, the Honorable Samuel Twelve, would have loved to be here, but he had some emergency engagement with the president, so he's not able to be here. So I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of the government of Liberia. We are grateful for the support that we've received so far, and we look forward to better collaboration with the project and with the GIFT program. But Liberia continues to make improvements in its transparency initiatives. With support of a consultant through the FOA project, we have been able to enhance the presentation of our budget. And for fiscal year 2021, we were able to publish our first Citizens Guide to the Budget based on the draft budget. Normally, in the past, we had done it after the fact when the budget was approved. But this year, we managed to do one based on the draft budget presented to the national legislature. Of course, there has been a lot of challenges, basically the lack of data. And I think it has to do with the capabilities of many of the spending entities to produce reports in a timely manner. So that has hampered our transparency initiatives in terms of publication. So to address some of these, a public participation mechanism for Liberia has been presented and approved by the Minister of Finance and Development Planning on behalf of the government. This mechanism, supported by GIFT, US, and World Bank, sees a partnership of the government with CSOs and establishes a fiscal transparency advisory board. That was presented by my technical team, headed by Mr. Johnson Williams yesterday. Yeah, what we aim to do with the Fiscal Transparency Advisory Board is to facilitate public participation in all phases of the budget process, including the preparation, approval, execution, and reporting. This requires access to public financial management data, for which the process is on a way to enhance a closer collaboration with entities to enhance the capacities to do so. We have also begun engagement with the legislature. We'll talk about the approval process of the budget. What happens now is that there's limited participation of the public in that process. We're working with them through the Legislative Budget Office to ensure that the public has access to those meetings and can be able to participate fully in those engagements. There is still, as I said, much more to be done, but on behalf of the government, we affirm our commitment as a country to improve our fiscal transparency and public participation. So on behalf of the government, again, let me take the opportunity to thank all of you for the support and the other participants from the other country, because this has been a learning experience for all of us. Our participation here exposes us to what others are doing, and we use that as a learning tool to improve ourselves. So we look forward to better collaboration in the future, and thank you for the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Brunson, and many congratulations to you and the Ministry of Finance in Liberia for publishing the citizens' budget and making efforts to try and not only expand transparency, but bring citizen voices into budget decision making. We look forward to getting further updates from your ministry on how the plans are proceeding. Now let's move on to the topic of tax transparency. Over the last couple of years, GIFT has been doing work to develop and advance principles on tax transparency. And in this session, I'm going to invite Jean Ross, who's been a consultant for GIFT and is a tax expert, to share the principles on tax transparency that have been developed. And we'd love to get an endorsement from the Stewards Assembly on these principles, but also to answer any questions or comments that you might have. Jean, over to you.
And we have a PowerPoint. I think Juan Pablo, are you going to do the opening on this? And then he's going to turn it over to me. But I think we do probably want the slides for this presentation.
Thank you, Jean. We do have some slides, but first, for you to consider, dear colleagues, we had a very enriching, important conversation on this topic a couple of days ago, and we already got very good suggestions. And I particularly remember and consider strongly two of them. One related to the need to refer and incorporate as much as possible the principles for human rights in fiscal policy that were developed by many of you, members of the network present here today, including ASIG, INESC, ICEFI, Fundar, among others. So we will make reference to that document, and before any next presentation of these principles, I will make sure with you that the way we refer to your principles is satisfactory. And we were also requested to define, not better, but to distinguish tax transparency as we are proposing it here, and that is access to tax information from the public, and differentiate that from the way OECD and others talk about tax transparency. And we will also make that clarification. Now, if you take me to the next slide, let me tell you very quickly about the process that we have in mind. So take me, if you please, to the next slide. Siguiente, transparencia, por favor, avanzamos. And this is a process. So, ahora ayúdame a poner, por favor, la presentación. Vamos a la transparencia número 2.
We need the slide, please.
The process that we have in mind. And it includes, first, requesting for a consensus within the stewards to start the consultation. We are not looking for a consensus on all of the terms of the principles. We are just requesting with a draft that we have to start the consultation. That consultation will include many of you in many occasions throughout the process. We will, of course, go particularly with some global norm setters, such as the IMF, the OECD, and have a meeting with them about the principles. We are planning to present the slides, muchas gracias, Aura, in at least 3 countries. And here is the first invitation to many of you. If you could help us with your tax authorities to have a discussion on these principles in Argentina, in Brazil, in Indonesia, the Philippines, that would be fantastic, because that's what we need to do. And after that, we will have an online open consultation, hoping to present a more final version in one of the annual meetings of the IMF and the World Bank. That is the process that we have in mind. Now, to you, Jean. Gracias, Aura.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this morning, my time, this evening for many of you. And it's been an honor to work with GIFT on this document. Taxes, the revenues the government uses to support public services, I think are implicitly included within the broader fiscal transparency framework addressed by previously adopted GIFT principles, the high-level principles on fiscal transparency, participation, and accountability, and also within the principles of participation in fiscal policy. However, I think over the last several decades, really thanks to the work of those of you in this conference and your colleagues around the world, there's emerging and very broad consensus around what constitutes transparency on the spending side of public budgets, but we lack a broadly shared definition of what constitutes tax transparency and how best to promote meaningful public participation in tax policy and administration deliberations. And the document, the principles we're presenting to you this morning, seek to fill that gap by identifying what types of information should be publicly available, who that information should be made available to, and the range of processes that should be open to public scrutiny and public participation. By way of background, and Juan Pablo talked about the very wonderful discussion that we had on Wednesday, these principles build off of and really owe a large debt to the work of Professors Murphy and Baker in Making Tax Work, which is recently published by GIFT, as well as previous work by GIFT, the International Budget Partnership, and by many of you again in your colleagues throughout the network. And really without your work and the work of GIFT, IBP, and others, they wouldn't exist because we needed that experience and history to really help us identify what we know and more importantly, maybe what we don't know. Juan Pablo also talked about some very good recommendations that we received earlier this week, the human rights and fiscal policy principles that some of our Latin American colleagues developed, as well as the need to differentiate these principles from some of the prior work by OECD, which really gets more to exchange of information among countries rather than the types of information that countries should make available to their own residents. I think the next slide, please. Let's go. And I think it's important to say as we move to looking at the principles that they're intended as a high-level statement and really a general roadmap that taken together define types of information and practices that constitute tax transparency. They're not intended to be the how-to guide. That's really the Making Tax Work document that the two professors produced. But we also wanted something that was detailed enough that governments could adopt it and use it to think about their own systems, and civil society could use it as a framework for holding government to account. Let's move one more, please. And they're also intended to be interdependent. So each of them independently will stand on its own, but also that together they form an integrated system that defines meaningfully what tax transparency can look at. We have a set of preambles that really give us the motivation for why the principles are needed, what they're important. They state the basic right to information and the importance of that information to understanding and holding governments account for the use of public resources. Next slide, please. One more. And now we move on to the principles themselves. And again, they start with that top level statement that all people have the right to access the information needed to understand whether a tax system meets its stated goals and works in the public interest. And implicit within this is also the fact that governments need to have goals for their tax system. They need to understand what role that system plays in shaping the economy, raising revenues, addressing inequities in income and social policy, the right to clear information. And as someone who spent my career working on tax issues, I would underscore the clear in that one, because a lot of times tax information can be opaque, even when it's available. Clear and measurable goals. Move to the next slide, please. Putting the information in context. And again, I think this gets to the fact that left on its own, lots of data about a tax system isn't all that helpful. You need to understand, what does the economy of a country look like? What is the income distribution? What does the business sector look like? It needs to be made available on a regular basis. It's timely to inform budget and policy deliberations. Next slide, please. Needs to look at what taxes aren't paid. The so-called tax gap analysis to understand where there's room for improvement, and the spillover effects on tax competition that often called the race for the bottom, where countries sometimes enact incentive regimes that can undermine revenues, but also have impacts on surrounding countries. Next slide, please. Tax administration matters. Lots of times we just look on the policy side. Administration also matters, and access to information about how the administrative systems work is key as well. Next slide. And lastly, but perhaps most importantly, the need for public engagement and participation of a broad range of stakeholders, not just those that traditionally have been involved in tax, such as the business community, representatives of the business communities, and the fact that tax systems have implications that go beyond a single country's borders, and understanding how a country's tax system fits into that broader framework through the work of the IFIs and others can be key for that broader economic framework. So we welcome your questions and your feedback, and I'll turn the floor back to Juan Pablo.
Thank you very much, Jean. This has been a long-term, big effort to put this together. It was a long process. It included very strongly, of course, the work of Professors Murphy and Baker. But Jean, you've made a wonderful effort with a, I believe, very strong result that is only a starting point. We still need to incorporate what I just mentioned at the beginning. And with that, we should be ready to start the consultation. And the request for you, gift stewards, is to support this idea of starting this conversation. Thank you, Vivek.
Yes, any questions or comments please raise your hand and I'll invite you to take the floor. One more chance. Anybody has any comments or questions? Yes, let's go first with Mr. Herrera and after that, Mr. Alves. Mr. Herrera.
Okay, I would like to...
Gracias, Jane. En tu experiencia en este tema de transparencia.
Thanks, Jane. In your experience when talking about tax transparency, to make the citizens feel that they are contributing, what is what the taxpayer expects in return to know that his taxes or her taxes are being well used? So in the first phase of telling the citizens what their taxes are being used for, what information is the most relevant that should come from the public administration?
Jean, before you answer that question, let's take the other question also from Mr. Alves. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to have some comments about how some fiscal benefits the governments sometimes take to the private sector. How can we address some kind of benefits or fiscal incentives, and if this idea is included in some of these principles that was present now?
Dean, over to you.
I'll take the second question first. In Principle 8, government should examine and publish information on the amount, sectors, and beneficiaries of tax incentives and preferences, is meant to address the second question. In terms of the first, I think that's an excellent question. It's really at the heart of why GIFT exists as a network, which is looking at fiscal systems as a whole, because certainly people care about the taxes that they pay. They care that what they pay is fair compared to other people in their society. But what most of us really care about is the public services that we get for our tax dollars. And if we feel like we're getting clean water, good transportation, healthcare, education, then we feel that our taxes are worth the investment. So I have always been a believer, and I think, again, it speaks to why GIFT has fiscal transparency in its name, that you need to contextualize the revenue information with spending information.
Juan Pablo.
Thank you, Vivek. Y yo agregaría.
I would like to add to what Jane said, that currently a central element for the trust of taxpayers is justice. Justice in the system. All of us pay taxes. How on earth is it possible that the richest people in the world, as individual taxpayers, barely do pay taxes? How is it possible that workers have retentions, whereas the entrepreneurial sector has so many possibilities and so many incentives? So this is a long discussion, but I do think that transparency in rules and transparency in accountability will be growing and will be a central element for building trust among taxpayers and this trust in their tax systems. From this perspective, Mr. Undersecretary, we congratulate you for the transparency efforts in Bogota.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Jay, over to you.
Thank you, Vivek, and thank you, Jean. I really like the way in which the principles are taking shape. In the South African context, we've had a tax authority that over the last decade has faced significant challenges implicated in state capture, the removal of tax officials who were going after high net worth individuals, tax evaders, and so the tax authority was hollowed out from the inside. And so I just put a comment in the chat there around, how do we ensure the heads of those authorities are appointed in an open and fair process, so we get the right candidate, and if there are concerns raised, that there is a proper procedure for them to be investigated and, if needed, removed. Thank you.
I think that's a good question, an interesting question, and certainly would let Juan Pablo weigh in and would welcome I hope I speak for Gift on this. I mean, there's so many there are places that have elected tax authorities that has pros and cons, their parliamentary systems. I think we need to think about how do we put something that is at once high level, but also promotes accountability, and would welcome some thoughts on how to structure that in a way that it addresses the full range of governmental structures. I mean, on that, I think we'd welcome thoughts on how to do that.
Juan Pablo, did you want to add to it?
Yes, thank you. You could probably perceive that the principles have 4 sections: right to information, proactive information, accountability, and then public participation. On accountability, we should definitely think about clarity, transparency on the way tax administrations recruit, evaluate, and eventually remove, and their own systems of accountability and of external control. Very good point. Thank you.
Great. Due to time constraints, I'm going to invite Rolly to ask his question or make a comment, and that will be the last one here. But if there are further questions and comments, please do send them over to the GIFT team. Rolly, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Vivek. Yeah, this is a welcome initiatives, because when you speak of fiscal, it's not just about budget or expenditure, but also revenues, and basically these are taxes. Now, for the Philippines, we have been started publishing this one. As part of it, we submit the budget. As far as our tax expenditure, those are foregone revenues, and that's part of our table that is being submitted to Congress. So this is a welcome initiative as far as we're concerned. So we welcome this, and probably I will invite our because in the Philippines, there's a separate department who handles our revenues. We serve the Department of Finance, and for us, we're just focused on the budget. So we'll just invite and refer this one to our counterpart in the Philippines, which is the Department of Finance. So thank you.
That's excellent, Rolly. I know that the GIFT team will be very excited to have an opportunity to engage with the Philippines tax authorities. And if there are other governments, as Juan Pablo mentioned, who would be willing to put the GIFT team in touch with the tax authorities, that would be really helpful. So we've come to the end of the assembly today. Before we end on this topic of the principles of tax transparency, does anybody have any objections to the GIFT team moving ahead with the principles. There are questions and there were comments that are going to get reflected in revisions that will be made. But other than sort of the details that were discussed today and in the previous session a couple of days ago, is there any other major objections that anybody has? I see a thumbs up from Jay, and and now from a few others. So we'll take that to be the endorsement of the principles, with sort of the caveat that there were some points raised by various people that the GIFT team will consider. That brings us to an end to this session. But before I close, let me just ask Juan Pablo if there are any last words he wishes to add in addition to his hearts and love you remark.
Just that. A big thank you, dear Assembly of the Stewards General Meetings. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. See you all soon.
Let's take a picture. Open your cameras, if you please. Let's say and give us a nice, beautiful smile. And my colleagues will take a picture. And there you see finally some of the colleagues that we haven't seen before. So good to see you. Okay.
All right.
Nice.
In 3, 2, 1, smile.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Happy birthday, GIFT.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday to you all, gifts.
Good to see you.